The origin of the Peeping Caddis fly was in the 1970s when George Anderson of the Yellowstone Angler and a guide on the Yellowstone River realized that trout were taking case caddis as food. He designed this fly with a brown case, the tan brown case here, followed by a chartreuse colored worm and a black head with legs. And the reason that he put the head and the worm in the case is that there's a problem with caddisfly that they can have multiple generations of cases on a river, some of them empty because the previous years they've hatched and the other ones are full. And he reasoned that you have to convince trout that there's a caddis worm in the case. So George must have got it right because now there are tens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Peking caddis fly patterns. It's also called the Peeping Caddis, but it's based on George's original pattern, the Peking Caddis. There's two basic types where one, the fly is tied all along the hook shank, on the hook shank only, and the other one where you have a protruding worm out over the hook bend. So those are the two major types. The reason for the explosion in the number of Peking caddis patterns is because it's been discovered that case caddis are day drifters. It was long known that they drift at sunset and sunrise, but lately it's been accepted that they drift during the day as well, making them available to the trout midday when the daytime angler is out there. I'm not going to go into the details. You can hit pause and look at the various sources and references for this contention. And it was LaFontaine who noticed that drifting case caddis do this unusual thing, that they move in and out of their case. As you see here, this is the out position, if you will. And this is what this color flash as it moves back and forth is what gave the idea behind the Peking caddis, where they have the short caddis worm sticking out over the hook shank and bend. This is usually colored chartreuse, and you can see that also the legs are quite prominent sticking out there. The other things that caddis do is maintain their cases as between either damaged or as they extend them as they grow. And here you can see the agile worm bending out over its case. So this is an interesting thing, that all this movement and color flashing makes these very alluring to trout. So a lot of materials have been used to make the Peking caddis worm, as you can see here. Most of these are chartreuse or a green color, like the natural, and you should always go to the stream and check the natural. But in particular, I would guess that chartreuse is probably a good color because it's bright and trout seem to like the theater of absurd. So in this fly tying video, we're going to tie the day drifter case caddis using floating fly line. And the reason we're going to do this is because we can add legs out on the end of the fly line. We shuck off the PVC and fray out the dacron underneath to make the legs that you see here. Here's a video clip of live Brachycentrus case caddis actively feeding in an aquarium. And you can see here to actively feed, they hold their arms out to catch diatoms and algae and such. And so this is why another example of how prominent these legs are on the live critter. Tying the day drifter caddis today. It's part of the Peking caddis family. So it's designed to look like a case caddis with a worm sticking out of it, a caddis worm sticking out of it. What I use to tie these caddis worms are fly lines that I color up to chartreuse color. Ideally, the line would be chartreuse colored, but I have one that's more of a pale green. The other thing I'd like to point out is that because it's a double tapered floating fly line, that I have various diameters I can work with, so I can proportion the size of the worm to the hook. Today I'm using a hook that's it's a size 14 Firehole 633, and the reason I use this size is just because the shank length if you can see here, is about 8 millimeters, the flat part of the shank. And that's, when I finish tying, it'll be around 10 millimeters. And that's about what you want to have for a mature case caddis. Now what I do is I cut off those little bits of fly line and at an acute angle. I don't know if you can see that. So I can tie it in, and it's going to come right out the back of the hook shank, more or less. Following this fly tying segment, there's a part on how to make these caddis worms, as well as the recipe after that. So I'm not going to go over the recipe too much. So we tie this in, leaving it stick out about 4 or 5 millimeters. But that's up to the tyer, How far he wants that worm to stick out is a choice. So I'm pulling pretty tight on this. I'm trying to dent the PVC to make it grip better. And then I add in just a dab of super glue, because we've got quite a bit of PVC out there. Next, we're going to tie in some O2O lead. And we're going to do this inversion style. So we want most of the lead to be on top of the hook shank. The other thing is we stop it well short of the eye, and we want it above the hook shank, like that. We wind back to where the worm comes out, and we break it off, and we do another one. We're going to do 3 pieces of lead. And they're going to be mostly on top of the hook shank for the inversion weighting. And the point is that we get 3 pieces of lead stacked up in a triangle, and then we have the fourth piece, a rod sticking below. We tend to get a square cross section. Okay. I tie in some small black wire. I had a piece cut here a second ago. I seem to have bumped it off. This is small, about 1/10 of a millimeter wire. I use black because the cases of the Brachycentrus, a case caddis on the Arkansas River, is very dark. I also use a copper amber color if I want better segmentation, or if I'm running across Brachycentrus that have lighter cases. I can also change the color of the Semperfli gel core. They make lighter ones. This is the mocha brown, which is quite dark, but that fits my needs for that river. Okay, I've pretty well coated the lead with thread to stabilize it too. So here I make a couple wraps of the micro fritz at the start to build it up. And then I start winding forward, side by side. And I pull every once in a while to tighten her all up and get a taper. I'm trying to get a slight taper to the eye. See, it's working out there a little bit pretty well, although it just drug off the lead. So now I'm ready to tie it off and cut it. Wind the case, the ribbing forward, which are not going to see much, but I like to sort of hold everything together with the ribbing wire. If we use the copper, we'd be getting very distinct segmentation. Of course, you should always tie the fly to fit your local bug. But this is a good start for these dark-cased Brachycentrus caddis. Cut that wire a little short. And I fold the wire back over and catch it to lock it in. And then I cut it off. Now I'm ready to whip finish. Ooh, I didn't do a good job of cutting that. I whip finish twice to lock the thread in, but I don't use any cement because I hate getting cement in the eye, or also cementing up the chenille and stuff. And if there's feathers involved, you often get very hard spots where the cement's soaked in. But there it is, the day drifter. I don't know if you can see it. There's kind of a nice flash caused by the microfritz. Let's measure it. So we're shooting for about 1 centimeter. Pretty dang close. And we got a few millimeters out the back. Sometimes I tie the worm a little bit longer, but I do try to keep the case quite narrow because I think fish react to bigger flies and are more turned off by bigger flies than small ones. So I do try to follow that convention. So to determine the optimal times to fish a case caddis fly, I went to the hatch chart for the upper Arkansas River in Colorado. And what I've done is taken the caddis hatches and compared them to the major competing hatches of that river. And I have a derivative line, the orange line here, which is the implied better times to fish case caddis. So from the biology of this, to take this first line, from the biology of the Brachycentrus occidentalis, we know that they pupate about 4 to 5 weeks ahead of when they hatch. We also know from research that in this green zone shown here, there's an increased activity level on them before they pupate. And so we have a week or two there where we're having increased drift of the Brachycentrus. So this leads us to an early spring period, late winter, early spring period, when there's optimal times to fish a case caddis. Then we have the interferences of the major competing hatches, like if there's a massive BYO hatch, the beta nymphs moving around and hatching are going to swamp out any signal from case caddis. So then in the fall, we have all the eggs that have been deposited by the caddis, and the growth of the next gen caddis happens, and at some point, we get back to maturing caddis that start drifting again. So this leads to, after the competing hatches, we have another orange time in the late summer through fall, where you have an optimal time of fishing the cased caddis. And in the dead of winter, you can fish it, but nothing much happens in the dead of winter unless you're dang lucky, or you're in one of those big holes and where the overwintering fish are, and it doesn't probably matter what you fish. You're going to probably have a slow day. You're going to catch some fish, and case caddis would certainly be part of that. This is how you prepare the head of a day drifter caddis. You take an old fly line. This one is a pale green one, and I want it to be a little deeper color, green. So I take a chartreuse colored Sharpie fine point pen, and you can actually, these are somewhat porous, the plastic, and it'll take the pin, as you can see here. Take the color on, and I get a really somewhat more of a chartreuse colored bright green, like the caddis worm. To make the legs at the head of the day drifter caddis, I take these needle nose pliers that have a groove in them, and you can, I'm going to shuck off the PVC starting about 6 millimeters back, a 1/4 inch back. There, you can see I didn't get it all. There. Now you can see I've exposed the dacron. And then what you do is you take a bodkin and you start teasing out the individual, unbraiding it, essentially is what you're doing. You're teasing out the legs. These fibers, you're teasing out these fibers, that is, that are going to look like legs. Okay, now when you look at the picture of the Brachycentrus caddis, the case caddis that we're copying with this, it has the dark brown legs. And so I'm taking now a Sharpie in dark brown and coloring up a little bit. The end of the tip is going to be colored a little bit. And then I'm coloring the legs as well here. Okay. Now what I do is, since the Brachycentrus has 3 pairs of legs, 2 are long and 2 pairs are long and 1 pair is short. So this is a little too thick for what I want to do. I want to emphasize that there's legs out there, so I don't want it melding into a big brush, you know. So I got to separate out some legs and then cut. The number of legs probably doesn't matter to trout. It's more of what matters to the fly tire, I suppose, and the look he's going for. So I just thin it out a little to give it. It makes each individual leg more distinctive by having fewer of them, is my thinking. So there you go. What you'll do is then trim this off a little long, and then we'll tie it in, and we'll probably cut it off at an angle so we can taper the body after we tie it in. So you taper this on, and then we'll tie it in and put some lead on.